another episode of Cerebral Palsy Answers. Bienvenidos a otro episodio más de Parálisis Cerebral Respuestas. Este episodio va a ser en inglés, pero no se preocupen. Próximamente haré más episodios en español. Pero bueno, back to English. I am very excited about this week's interview because one of the things that this podcast, since I started this podcast, one of the things that it has brought me is the ability and the possibility to connect with people with CP all over the world. And such is the case of my interviewee today, who is in Melbourne, Australia, and he connected with me through Instagram. He started following me, I think, when he saw a post about my podcast. So thank you. And so I'll interview him. I'll interview him today, and his name is Wade Costley. Did I get that right, Wade?
You did. Perfect. That's the thing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Wade, for joining me today. I was really looking forward to this interview, and it really means a lot that you are going to share with me a little bit about your story with cerebral palsy. We share a diagnosis. So I'm very excited that you will share a little bit about, what it is like to live with CP, but also not only live with CP, but you lived all over the world. So that is very interesting to me and fascinating. So let's just start from the beginning. Can you tell me a little bit about your early life and like where did you grow up and your diagnosis of cerebral palsy?
Sure, as I said. First of all, thank you very much for having me on your podcast. It's a real pleasure to do this. So thanks again for inviting me. So to your first question, so I was born in the Canal Zone, which is a former U.S. territory in Panama. My father was in the U.S. Air Force and was stationed there. So yes, I was born in Panama, and my mother had a very difficult birth with me, and so during birth, I became stuck in the birth canal, and so in a panic, the doctors used forceps essentially to pull me out. And when they did that, they crushed my skull, which caused my brain to hemorrhage. So I wasn't breathing when I was born either. So one of the doctors, had to resuscitate me, effectively giving me mouth to mouth for 90 minutes before I was able to take my first breath independently. So as a result, I had spastic diplegia, like you do, version of cerebral palsy. And I was in an incubator for about 3 weeks. They used instruments to essentially pull my skull back into place because, as you know, baby skulls are very malleable at that point. The advice given to my parents at the time, and keep in mind, this is 1969, so nearly 55 years ago. Their advice to my parents was to put me in an institution because I would basically be a vegetable, and I would live to probably age 12 or so. So luckily for me, my parents didn't accept that advice and instead brought me home So, as I said, we were a military family, so we did move around quite a bit. Um, we moved back to the U.S. 9 months after I was born, and we lived in the state of Georgia for a while, and then moved to San Antonio in Texas, uh, where um, they actually sent me to a school for children with cerebral palsy. Um, and even though I was 3 going on 4 years old at the time, it left lasting memories for me. Um, there's one of the things they would do, for example, at the school, there was a ramp at the school, and they would put us on these square wooden, um, you know, pallets, if you will, with the wheels on them and shag carpet on the top, which really made them cool. And you could slide down the ramp on these things. And they would do it 2 or 3 times, and we really enjoyed that. And then they would say, okay, so if you want to slide down the ramp again, you have to push yourself all the way back up the ramp.
Wow.
So you can imagine, kids 3, 4, 5 years old, essentially, you know, on these boards trying to pull themselves up a hill. Um, and my lasting memory is that you would get about 3 quarters up the way and your arms would just give out and you'd just go right back down to the bottom and they would say, try again.
Mm.
So why that sticks with me, a half century on, is that it taught a valuable lesson about there are going to be challenges in life. And, if you really want to reach the top and have fun, there's going to be setbacks along the way. And you're going to have to try multiple times. So I think that was a very valuable lesson taught, and it still sits with me. I was, just 3 or 4 years old at the time.
Wow.
Um, Afterwards, we moved to Colorado, where I spent most of my growing up. I went to the same school district, kindergarten through 12, public school, mainstream, which I think back in the day, we're talking mid 1970s, at this point was somewhat uncommon, but it really was a good thing. And so I learned to walk around 4 going on 5. Um, I wore back then braces, which,
Mhm.
if you've seen the old photos, the brown leather boots with the metal rods going at the legs. That was quite the fashion back then, and very different from the high tech, lightweight AVOs that we have today for
Yeah.
people with CP. Um, but my parents, I have 2 older brothers. They, didn't treat me any differently.
Mhm.
Um, all the houses we lived in had that they were, you know, bi-level houses, so they had stairs. I wasn't able to climb stairs until I was 11.
Mhm.
So I learned to effectively body surf downstairs on my stomach, which actually is quite fun and is faster than going downstairs the normal way. So, and to give you an example of how my fellow students thought that was okay, we went on a field trip to a museum And I remember in the museum there's a large, marble staircase, and so I just got on my knees and stuck my feet back and went, ripping down the flight of marble stairs, and you know, security ran out, wondering what was going on, and my classmates just said, "What? Like that's the way he goes downstairs? No big deal." So, um, yeah, so a fairly normal, I'd say, childhood. Have a good network of friends, and yeah, so ended up being elected class president of my senior class in high school. So
Mhm.
yeah, growing up was pretty easy, I think, all
Okay.
things considered.
Well, thank you so much for sharing those anecdotes. I mean, just imagining that makes me I was actually, for those of you that can are hearing us and who would like to see the video version, well, on YouTube, I was actually laughing. Um Oh my God, Wade. So that, you mentioned that at some point in your primary school, you went down this hill and they would tell you, you gotta, okay, you want to go up again, or, you would go down and then they would say, you want to go up again? Well, try again and use your arms to pull yourself up. And you said that that taught you that if you want to be in the top, that it will take multiple tries, and there will be challenges, but you gotta keep trying. So my next question is, how has CP shaped your outlook in life and how you deal with such challenges, if any,
Well,
right?
yeah, I mean, as you well know, and anyone else with CP knows, it's a lifelong uh, journey with a lot of twists and turns. It's a lifelong condition, and we don't know anything different.
Mhm.
So I think from early on, we learn that we need to figure out how to approach challenges in a different way. Um, and you know, the when I was 3 years old and going down the ramp is a perfect example of that. So um, the I guess it's never stopped me from doing anything that I wanted to do.
Mhm.
Um, for example, I cycle quite a bit. And for exercise, I've always been interested in that. But I don't have enough balance to ride a bicycle. So, I started out, you know, riding tricycles. And in fact, when I went to college at the University of Colorado at Boulder, one of the first things I did was buy one of those old style granny fire engine red tricycles with the big wide comfy seat and the wire basket in the back. Because
Yay!
I was really cool back then,
Yeah.
and so needless to say, I was the only student on campus with a fire engine red tricycle. But um, you know, you learn to adapt, and that's a way of adapting and getting around. And you know, I'm a you know middle-aged grown man now, and I still think that riding a tricycle is pretty cool.
I mean, that's all I can ride, tricycles. I don't know how to ride a bike. I don't, like you, I don't have enough balance for that. Well, I don't drive, so uh tricycles are the way to go for me as well. I think that's super cool. I would like to see a picture of that. what you call granny tricycle.
Yeah, I can send you one later on. I can also send you what I ride today.
Okay.
Technology has obviously advanced quite a bit, and
Yeah.
I ride what's called a recumbent tricycle, where you pedal out in front and just
Right.
kick back and enjoy the ride.
So, as you were mentioning, CP has not stopped you from doing a lot of things, and you've learned to adapt, and as we all do, um we learn to be creative and to move around our environment, which is, as I think we would agree, not the most accessible, because this world, it was not built for people with disabilities. But we learn to be
Definitely.
creative and we learn to move around. And your CP has not stopped you from doing things and having an amazing life. And one of the things that I'm really excited about, when I met Wade and previously to this interview, we would talk over Instagram because that's how we connected, and then LinkedIn, and then we talked over Zoom previously, and just hearing this story. And when he told me, yeah, I've lived in Australia and Brazil and China and the US and I don't know how many other countries, but um actually, my next question is, what took you to these countries? How come you lived in such different countries, and how has the experience of inclusion, well, how has the experience of accessibility and inclusion changed in each of these countries that I mentioned, um, that you lived?
Yeah, so I've always been interested in the world in general and experiencing it. So um, this particular type of work that I was doing, um, I worked for a multinational firm that um, uh, produced essentially software for the telecommunications industry. And so basically, I was a consultant for them, and um, we did telecom billing software. So every telco in the world needs to be able to, bill their customers and bring in the money for their services. Um, so it's quite a universal uh, talent to have, and so that's how I was sent to so many places. So um, yeah, so I worked in 13 countries across 4 different continents
Oh my
and worked
God.
at 25 different telcos during my career. So, um, so I got a good view of how accessibility and inclusion um, are looked at in these countries, and accessibility and inclusion, at least for me, are two different things. So, accessibility in different countries depends a lot on government policy and the associated funding that
Mhm.
goes with that, because it's associated with physical structures, infrastructure, um, accessible pathways to education and work and that sort of thing. But inclusion, at least in my view, is mainly cultural. And so you can have a place that is, you know, categorically not too accessible, but the inclusion is off the charts.
Mhm.
And so that's what I really noticed in working in these countries. To give you an example,
Mhm.
So I lived in Rio de Janeiro for 4 years,
Mhm.
um, and traveled throughout Latin America for work. Um, and um, Rio de Janeiro itself isn't the most accessible place. However, I've never experienced a more inclusive society. I mean,
Mhm.
people, were so willing to help you out and get you to where you were going. And I remember I've been there less than a month. I
Mhm.
was going to work, and the driver dropped me off at a, the incorrect place. And so I came to this staircase that had no handrail or anything.
Mhm.
And um and I since retired from bike surfing downstairs. So so I just asked someone to just finish climbing those stairs, you know, if they could help me get down
Mhm.
the stairs. And, you know, without any hesitation, he held his
Mhm.
arm out and I grabbed on, and we went down the stairs. So, yeah,
Mhm.
so inclusion is definitely, I think, a cultural perspective.
Mhm.
Um, and it definitely differs from country to country, as does accessibility.
Um, that's very interesting that you mentioned that because, well, first of all, 13 countries. That's amazing, Wade. I thought you had only lived in four, so so you just added more.
Well, so just to clarify, so I would say I've lived in four, so Panama, the U.S., Brazil, and Australia. But through my work, I was sent to projects
Okay.
in other countries, such as
Right.
China, and Venezuela, and
Right.
Ecuador, and Thailand, and the list goes on.
And I remember that when we talked, um, you mentioned the case of one country in particular, which is China, and that can you just mention a little bit about your experience? It's kind of like the other side of the coin of living in China as someone with CP.
Yeah, sure. As a saying. So, as I mentioned, before, you know, accessibility and inclusion differs from country to country, and whilst Brazil and I must say that in my 4 years being based in Brazil, I almost forgot that I had cerebral palsy because it was just so, I didn't get stared at. No one asked questions. They just accepted me for who I am.
Yeah.
Um, so, but there are certain countries where I think, people with disabilities are not as uh, visible in society.
Mhm.
Um, and so there are countries that I think in most, I would say, modern, economically developed countries, it's really not
Mhm.
an issue. But in certain, emerging countries economically, it can be an issue. As you mentioned, I did work in China for a while. I worked there for 4 months in Shanghai, which is a real big, wheel and dealing town.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I noticed that there weren't really, I don't remember seeing any other people with disability um, out there. And
Mhm.
so, um, and I think, a lot of it is just the fact that the way people behave is simply out of ignorance, no real fault of their own, but um, some of it is, you know, behaving in a menacing way. So like I, so there's certain tourist areas in Shanghai. And I remember I was with a colleague and we were walking along the Bund in Shanghai, and shop owners would come out of their shops and you know start to imitate how I walked, and and then just laugh and point, and it's quite confronting, and um, and then also I was in Beijing with actually a friend of mine from Brazil, and she was astonished at
Mm-hmm.
how I was treated and viewed there. We were actually in Tiananmen Square, and
Mm-hmm.
people would. And these are grown up adults walking up and just pointing at my legs and just staring with mouths open and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's quite confronting. I have, and it's not limited to China. There's other countries as well. I worked in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur, and I remember walking down. It was on a weekend, middle of the day, and walking down the street with a colleague of mine, and this woman passed us, and then she stopped. She came back, and she looked at me head to toe, not in a good way,
Mm-hmm.
and a very almost menacing look on her face,
Mm-hmm.
and then just walked away.
Wow.
So um, I told I told my colleague, I said, hold on a sec. So I walked back to her and stood in front of her and did the exact same thing to her.
Good for you.
And she was very taken aback. So hopefully that taught her a lesson
Mm-hmm.
that
Yeah.
it is quite rude to do that to someone, especially when they've had no interaction with you at all. So, but I think that with with more people with disabilities getting out there in the world, and I do have hope that societies will progress and
Yeah.
become more inclusive. And some it said do better than others. I was in Chile in the early 1990s. My father lived there for quite a while,
Uh-huh.
and we were in Santiago. This is in the mid 1990s, and he pointed out that there were slogans everywhere. They had this campaign for people with disabilities, and the slogan went something along the lines of "Que igualdad y respete la diferencia." So
Mm-hmm.
create equality and respect the difference. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that was really a good, way even back then of saying, hey, we need to do something. We need to be inclusive, but we need to be respectful as well.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing that you shared that. That reminds me of, well, I many of I live in the States. I live in California, a pretty progressive state. I live in San Diego, and I still get stares, stares as in people looking at me and staring at how I walk. Um, but but not as much anymore. But when I moved to Spain, which is a country I love and for me is my second home. I love Galicia in particular. I love Vigo. One of the things though that did take me aback is that people would stop me in the street and they would ask me, ¿Por qué caminas así? Like, why do you walk like that? You know? Or they would like stop and just stare at me without talking to me. And I was like, okay, what's going on? So that just reminded me of when I lived in Spain, which is again a country I love and for me is my second home, but it was at that time I was trying to kind of forget about my disability in a way. I was in a period of my time where I wanted to get away, and when I moved there, like people constantly reminded me, that I walked differently. So there was no hiding it, no running away. I think that's topic of another episode, but that when you mentioned that about Malaysia and China, it happened to me similarly to in Spain.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
It's but it's something that unfortunately I think people with disabilities um, had to learn to to deal with. Uh,
Yeah.
you know, um, it doesn't just stop after graduating from high school. It will go on your entire life. So
Hmm.
you need to be resilient and just figure out ways of dealing with it. So
Yeah.
um,
And
yeah,
sorry, Wade, sorry
yeah,
to
that's all
interrupt
right.
there. Um, and now that you mentioned, you've lived in all these countries and you visited all of these countries, which for me it's fascinating because I'm very curious about the world, and I always look at the map and I'm like, where next, right? But how has visiting, or not even visiting, but rather living in Panama, in Brazil, in where else? Oh, Australia
Uh,
and the
yeah.
US. How has that shaped your sense of identity, right? And as it pertains to being a person with CP, and then also just as a global citizen, like, because there's just different ways that disability is viewed in these countries, how did that shape, if any, in any way, your identity?
Well, I think that first of all, I think I need to mention that my whole international career, um, didn't happen overnight. Living abroad, even though I wanted to do it um, since I was little, um, I found that the biggest challenge about living abroad wasn't actually living abroad. It was, trying to get the opportunity to work and live abroad. And,
Hmm.
for someone to actually give me that chance.
Hmm.
So just to elaborate on that, I graduated from uni. I joined a firm that was a multinational firm, but then, you know, I did apply for these international postings, but too often, there's misconceptions about what someone can't simply do because of their disability. Um,
Hmm.
and those are actually treated as fact in
Hmm.
a way. And I applied for a posting in Mexico City,
Hmm.
um, and I heard from a colleague that in the group executive meeting when they're deciding who was going to go, um, that said, "Well, wait, like, how would he get out of a taxi?"
Hmm.
you know, it you wouldn't be able to. So, you wouldn't be able to get out of the El Vocho, the green Volkswagen Beetles that they have
Okay.
around Mexico City. So, but did they ask me about it? No. So, and then another example, I applied to be sent to Sweden, and the head of HR of all people told me, well, there's a lot. Sweden's a very old country. There's a lot of stairs and buildings, and how would you get your wheelchair up those stairs? And I looked to both sides of me and said, but I've never used a wheelchair. I don't use a wheelchair. And he just didn't even blink and said, you know what I mean.
Mhm.
So, it's, and when you're a person with disability and you've fought so hard um, to get a job, you're almost afraid. Granted, this is mid 1990s, but you're almost afraid to say anything because you might lose your job, and then it might be very difficult to get another one. So
Yeah.
it can be very challenging. But back to your question around what have I, how has it shaped my sense of identity? Um, you know, for me at least, it's I wanted to live in at least one different country
Mhm.
because I thought that it would be the ultimate test of being independent. So if you can leave your family, move to a country you've never been to, learn a language that you don't know, you know, work, figure out your whole, getting a new place to live,
Mhm.
figuring out the city. For me, at least, that I wanted to prove to myself that I could be independent. And for me, that was like the ultimate test.
Mhm.
So, um, so that's how I guess I wanted to make sure that I could really identify as someone being totally independent. So,
Mhm.
um, and as far as being a global citizen, it's really been beneficial to see how disability is viewed and treated in different countries.
Mhm.
Um, and to then incorporate that knowledge into how you interact with people, within the country that you actually live in.
Yeah. Wow. Um, I can totally relate to when you mentioned that living in another country was your ultimate sense of independence. I think for many of us, uh, or I should take that back. I can only speak for myself, but independence for me also was the ultimate test, and to make sure that I could do everything on my own. But now I'm finding out that we should, there's nothing wrong with being interdependent and relying on other people. And that the idea that independence is the ultimate goal, I think that is not so accurate.
Well, you know, and absolutely, I would say that for me at that stage of life, that was the ultimate goal for me.
Yeah.
Um, Now that I'm older and, with CP, there are, it's a lifelong condition, as we know, and there are, you know, degenerative properties of it in the form of premature aging and that sort of thing. So, equally is as important as you alluded to is, figuring out what you need help with
Mhm.
to maintain quality of life, um, and not be afraid to ask for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, you know, you have all this wisdom, Wade. I mean, I want to call you again. um,
Anytime.
yeah, thank you. I'm probably gonna go visit you in Australia. Um, and just as a side note, Wade lives in Melbourne, Australia, which is, I think, one of the sporting capitals of the world. Um, and if there's anything, I don't know if I've shared this on the podcast. I love sports. So I love tennis. I love Formula One. I love soccer. So, Melbourne, Australia in particular is like the capital for, the Australian Open. And then F1 is Formula One racings, and they also have a circuit. So, Wade, I'm going to visit you sometime. um,
You're welcome anytime.
Thank
And
you. Um, and going back to and trying to get as much wisdom from you as possible, and this will be one of my final questions of the interview. Oh my god, it went by so fast. What advice would you give to, a youngster, an 18-year-old, with CP, with a, or with in general with a disability, keeping in mind that, obviously we have different types of disabilities, and disability is not a one size fits all. And even within the CP, there are different complexities, that each case is very different. But what advice would you give to someone who is considering living and living and traveling abroad?
I would say that for 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 living abroad, and specifically, working abroad, um, I would recommend, if possible, and this goes for anyone with a disability or not with a disability,
Hmm.
to try to be employed by a company that has offices around the world,
Okay.
um, because that way you can advocate to be, relocated to a different country.
Okay.
Um, so that, I mean, that's how I do it. It also makes it much easier with um, visa requirements, assistance in finding places to live, and that
Hmm.
sort of thing. So, but to do that though, I think also, if it's possible to learn a skill um, that can be used in different countries, that's a way to go as well. Um, for traveling, um, I think that, especially traveling for holiday, um, you know, as I as we both know, and as I'm experiencing now, some of the degenerative qualities of um, cerebral palsy. Um, so just for the audience, I use a walking frame now, as
Hmm.
my mobility declines. And so, um, when I travel, um, I contact tour agencies and accommodations locations to actually make sure that they're accessible. They might say so on TripAdvisor or
Hmm.
on their own website, but my advice
Hmm.
would be to contact these companies and
Hmm.
make sure that they respond.
Hmm.
I've been on tours where I was in Istanbul 3 months ago, where I was on a 3-day tour. They said they were accessible, and then after the first day, as soon as they dropped me off at the hotel, I got a notice that the rest of my tour was canceled because the guide did not agree to a quote unquote disabled tour. Um, so again, make sure that you do get confirmation that they're accessible and inclusive.
Wow. And I'm sorry you had to deal with that in Istanbul. And actually that leads me to your last question, my last question, well, the last question for you and my last question. Um Knowing that there are so many places still that are very inaccessible. In this case, you just gave an example of Turkey, right? But Istanbul in particular, there's so much inaccessibility and exclusion, and we still have a long way to go. What kind of work or advocacy efforts are you involved in currently? Because I know you're involved in a lot of things. I mean, obviously, I know it because I follow you, and I know you host a series of webinars with CP Guide. So I just want people to hear all the things that you're involved in now as an adult with CP in terms of your work and advocacy efforts.
Sure. So I basically retired from my so-called international career a couple of years ago, and um, so after that, I was trying to figure out, or even leading up to that, trying to figure out what I was going to do. I really wanted to do something where I felt like I was giving back. Um, and making a difference as well. So I'm currently I serve as a lived experience member on the board of directors at Cerebral Palsy Australia, which
Mhm,
is a national organization that aspires to be the voice of cerebral palsy in Australia by
mhm,
elevating the concerns and experiences of the cerebral palsy community uh,
mhm,
in Australia. As you said as well, I host a series of webinars on a website called My CP Guide, which is mycpguide.org.au.
mhm, mhm,
On there, in addition, you can find information resources from around the world on
mhm,
cerebral palsy, and also a series of blogs that are written by people with lived experience
mhm,
of cerebral palsy.
mhm,
In addition to that, I serve as a member on the Australian New Zealand Cerebral Palsy Strategy Collaboration Group,
mhm,
which consists of uh, people with lived experience, um, medical professionals, and executives of disability
mhm,
organizations in both Australia and New Zealand. And we kind of look at ways that we can combine forces
mhm.
across between the two countries to improve the lives of people with CP. So that's basically what I do now.
You say it so humbly. That's just, you know, and I'm listening to this whole list of things and it's just so amazing. I hope you're very proud of everything that you do for us living with cerebral palsy. That's incredible that you're, lifting up voices of people living with CP, such as ourselves. I'm so proud and I'm so grateful to the universe that I've been able to cross paths with you because you're just such a bright person. I when I see you, I think of yellow, which is my favorite color. I think you're very bright and yellow. And if you would like to see Wade again, I invite people to see the video version of this interview on YouTube because he's smiling and it just makes me happy, Wade. Thank you for everything that you do, for all your advocacy efforts, for your work, tireless work. Like I said, you say it so humbly, but it's just a lot. Is there any last remarks that you would like to share? Anything that I missed that you would like to share with the audience?
Um, well, first of all, thanks again, Suzanne, for having me on this podcast. It's been a pleasure, and thanks to you for everything that you do. We talked about your I guess life story earlier, and I think it's great that you host essentially a bilingual podcast, and and spread the word in Spanish about cerebral palsy. But I would say that there's I actually have a sticky note, and it's quite an old one, but I have it at my desk. Um, so it just has three words on it, and that is inclusion, visibility, and engagement. And I think that these three things we need to keep in front of our minds and essentially fight for every day, not only for us, but the future generations of people with disabilities.
Absolutely. Repeat those three words, Wade.
They are inclusion, visibility, and engagement. And the reason I had those three, it doesn't stop at accessibility. Inclusion is the next step, but you can be included, but then ignored. So visibility is the next step, and then they can see you. But to really achieve full potential in that space, there needs to be engagement on both sides. So I keep those three words here at my desk and look at them every day to make sure that we work towards a world where people with disabilities are included, visible, and have full engagement with society.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Wade. And with those final remarks, I don't even want to add anything. It's so powerful. Thank you so much for having taken the time to do this interview. And I'm sure I'll follow up because I'm sure you're going to have many more adventures that you'll want to share. And so thank you so much, Wade. It's been my pleasure to interview you. I hope you enjoyed this interview as much as I did.
I definitely did. And thank you again for having me and for everything you do. Your podcasts are wonderful. So thank
you so much. I will stop the interview before I cry. So I'll see you in the next episode of Cerebral Palsy Answers, Parálisis Cerebral Respuestas. If you want, you can subscribe to my channel or not. This is a democracy, so, subscribe to the channel and leave your comments. And I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. That's it for today. Thank you so much for joining me in another episode of the Cerebral Palsy Answers podcast. And remember, if you have any questions regarding cerebral palsy in Spanish or English, please submit your question to cerebralpalsyanswers@gmail.com or head over to my website, www.azucenagarcia.com, and you can submit your question there. Thank you.